ahead and get this meeting underway. Today at the Committee of the Whole, we have two items. The first one will be crime statistics briefing, and then we will have an update on the inclusion strategies and actions. And first is Kevin with the crime statistics.
Good evening, Council President Pavoni and members of Council. I'm going to provide basically 5 things this evening, kind of an overview of crime statistics in the city of Renton. Talk a little bit about the 2 different types of crime statistics, UCR, which is Uniform Crime Reports, versus NIBRS, which is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. I'm going to talk about the historical crime rate in Renton, look at some regional comparisons, and then some of our current efforts and accomplishments and challenges, and then offer some, if you have any questions at any time, please let me know. Usefulness of UCR data. UCR data, which is basically the Class 1 crimes, have been reported to the FBI since 1930. And typically they are used for law enforcement to look at budget, planning, resource allocation, and also criminal justice research looks at crime stats to study the nature of the cause and the movement of crime over time. And obviously the news media looks at crime statistics provided by the UCR program to inform the public about the state of crime as it compares at the national level. But there are some pitfalls. Some of the pitfalls is that it's an incomplete analysis, has often created misleading perceptions, adversely affecting geographical entities and their residents. I'll give you some examples in a little bit. UCR statistics only include jurisdiction population figures along with reported crime, clearance rates, and arrest data. Rankings ignore the uniqueness of each locale. Some factors that are known to affect the volume and the type of crime occurring from place to place are population density and degree of urbanization, various variations in composition and population, particular youth concentration, economic conditions, including median income, poverty level, job availability, modes of transportation, policies of other components of the criminal justice system, like the prosecutorial, judicial, correction, probation programs, citizens' attitude towards crime, and crime reporting practices in the citizens. So some of the factors known to affect crime reporting include responsiveness of law enforcement, the perception of the law enforcement's ability to effectively resolve the complaints when they're reported upon, and the community's expectations. So all these things roll into the overview of crime data and how responsive and how effective law enforcement is. Like I said earlier, the FBI in 1930 developed the UCR Class 1 crimes, and they are homicide, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, theft, burglary, auto theft, and arson. Now, aggravated assault, that's what we call felony assault, where it has to be, a weapon has to be used, or there has to be seriously bodily injury. A simple assault, or just punching somebody in the nose, would not be included in these statistics, so it's only very serious assault cases. Now, NIBRS, this was starting to be created by the FBI in the 1980s and 90s, looking for a way to kind of have a broader approach at crime statistics. And so as they rolled out NIBRS, the state of Washington became a NIBRS compliant state, and as of 2014, we've been reporting our crime statistic using the NIBRS system. And this system uses 33 offenses instead of the 8 offenses. However, those 8 offenses are included in the 33, so it gives you a more well-rounded idea of crime in a particular area. This is kind of historic information. This is the UCR Class 1 crimes. Those are those 8 crimes. Look by per thousand population over time. As you can see, this goes back to about 1985, that we kind of hit our peak in about 86, 87, where we had almost 120 crimes per thousand population. As you can see, that was slowly going down until about 2000 when it started increasing. Then about 2005, we hit another peak right around 100 crimes per thousand. And as you've seen over the years, it's decreased until about 2011, and we're seeing a slight increase. I'll go over the reasons for that increase here in a little bit. So if you look at these numbers.
So excuse me, Chief, is there a reason for that? I mean, is there economics behind that?
behind the.
behind the peak in 2005, and why did it go up and why did it then come down?
One of the reasons is auto theft. And I have a separate graph for that coming up. That's one of the
Okay.
reasons.
Auto theft?
Auto theft?
Auto theft. And so if you look at this, and predominantly these numbers, if you just look at, today we're just under 60 crimes per thousand under the UCR, which is those 8 crimes compared to 120. So our rate is almost 50% reduction from our peak in the late 1980s. And a lot of this is driven by property crime, because here's the property crime for the same years. The graph looks pretty similar. We peaked in the late 80s. We kind of had another uptick in the mid 2000s. Then it went down, and then slowly it's starting to rise again. And these property crimes, these are larceny, burglary, auto theft, and arson. If you look at violent crime, these are homicide, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. Kind of up and down. The peak isn't the same as a property crime, as you recall. In the lowest part, property crime peaked in the late 80s. Here, it actually decreased in the late 80s. It was high in 1985, and then it started going up again and started peaking and being pretty consistent in the late mid 90s, slowly going down, and then we're seeing a small little uptick we had in 2015. And I guess this is based on per thousand population. So even if you look at our annexation of Benson Hill was effective in 2008, we're already still kind of on a decline.
Chief Ruth has a question.
Yeah, it's similar of the question that the President Pavon had. Again, what did we do right from 2015 to 2015, or what happened that it decreased? Do we know?
It's complicated. I can't sit here and it's been great law enforcement or effectiveness. I know you'll see in the auto theft stats that there was a push to really go after auto theft by the King County Prosecutor's Office. You saw a decline, and then after that stopped, it increased, and now we're trying to make that same effort today. I mean, there's universities and professors out there that make a whole career out trying to anticipate why crime is what it is. It can be everything from socioeconomic issues. It can be age of America as we grow older and the birth rate's lower. You don't have that Pecking on Python kind of thing of that, that target, 16 to 25 age of youth that commit a disproportionate amount of crimes. There's a lot of reason why crime ebbs and flows, and I'll go over that a little bit later, some of the socioeconomic issues.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Gorman.
Yeah, and I think the chief hasn't said it yet, but I mean, it's absolutely true that our police do a great job. But a lot of these trends you'll see countywide and even statewide. I mean, isn't that true?
Correct,
So,
and national.
yeah, so it's hard to analyze anything that happened in Renton during that period. It's kind of like we'll see that kind of across all the cities, and then it'll uptick across all the cities, and so those trends are out there. I think our police do better job than many cities, but even so, we just see the trends go up and down with the sort of global.
If you look at the violent crime, in 2016, our rate was just about, I think, 2.6 crimes per thousand. Of the statistics the FBI keeps, they look at the data and they put it in different segments. And they have one segment of all cities across the nation who reports crime between cities of their population of 100,000 and 250,000. The average violent crime rate was 4.7, and ours was less than 3. And so we are below nationally the rate of violent crime for cities our size.
Thank you.
So really, I talked earlier, what's driving our increase in crime recently, and that's auto theft. This is actual incidents of auto theft. This isn't based on 1,000 population. So as you can see, in the mid-'80s, when we were a city of probably 45,000, we had about 600 auto thefts. And you saw that rise until about 2006, and then it started dropping. Prosecutor's office became very engaged. We were being very successful with a lot of efforts. Then over time, they either look to other initiatives, or people get out of jail, we start seeing a rise. And so we've seen this rise begin really in about 2009. If you look at these numbers, in 2016, we had about 1,100 auto thefts in the city. And again, looking at that FBI stat, in all the cities across the U.S. who have a population between 100,000 and 250,000, the average rate of auto theft per 1,000 is 3.4. This last year in 2016, we were 10.5. And this is a regional issue. The Puget Sound area leads the nation in auto theft. Why that is, there's a lot of reasons. Is it because we're a port city? I don't necessarily believe it's a port city. If you look at the type of cars being stolen, this isn't like what you see on television where they're stealing all of our Porsches and Lamborghinis in town. Most common vehicle being stolen are older model Hondas and Toyotas, and they're being used for transportation. It's really what auto theft. And because the amount of people that we arrest, when they go before a judge, typically they are released on their own recognizance just to steal again. And we've had numerous meetings regionally. Some of us in the South King County and some of the police chiefs met with the presiding judge down at the RJC, seeing what we can do to at least get some of the main players held on bail. And they wouldn't give us any promises, but it's typical to have someone we arrest, be released on bail or no bail, be arrested again within a month, released on low bail, arrested again within a month, be released on low bail. And so, then it usually takes 6 to 9 months for the criminal justice system to catch up on the initial charge. And so that's some of the bigger issues. Because it is a low score on the matrix when it comes to any kind of sentencing, that's one of our challenges with auto theft.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
Yeah,
Corman.
Chief, is that, have the penalties become lighter in the last 10 years, or is it, I thought we were trying to elevate the seriousness, but do you recall?
I just have some base knowledge. There are some sentencing review guidelines, and all offenses have a certain amount of points. So as you get more offenses, more convictions, you increase your points, and based on the points is based on your sentence. And auto theft is really low on the point scale.
I see. Okay. Thanks.
To the point, auto theft has really changed what we've done as far as our pursuit policy. We've changed our pursuit policy to the point where we do not authorize officers to pursue a vehicle strictly for being a stolen vehicle. Because it endangers the officers, it endangers the motoring public. If we go through a long pursuit, more than likely property damage is going to happen. End of the day, nothing happens on the criminal justice side. We've had several incidents in this past couple of years where we've had pursuits. Before we changed our pursuit policy, where there was property damage to the officers' cars, to the victims' cars, to other people in the motoring public, only to see the person released the next day. And so that's one of the main reasons we changed our pursuit policy. However, the good news is we are seeing, if you look at January and June this year compared to January and June of last year, we've seen about a 29% decrease in the number of auto thefts. And so whether or not we're making headway, I know that the prosecutor's office is very aggressive at charging auto theft. They're very aggressive at requesting high bail, but at the same time, the judges make the decision on who gets held on how much bail.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, Mr. Corman.
Do you think, Chief, are older models preferred because they have less passive alarm systems and GPS tracking and things like that? Or do you think that has anything to do with it?
I think a couple of things. I think with the older Hondas and Toyotas, there are so many Hondas and Toyotas out there, and with shaved keys. If you have a well-worn old Honda key, it'll fit almost any older Honda key.
Oh.
I had an 88 Toyota Camry, and I used to drive that to work about 10, 15 years ago, and I went downstairs to jump in my car. Once I got inside, I realized that wasn't my car. It was someone else in the city that had a mid-'80s Toyota Camry that the key just worked. So that's
I see.
unfortunate.
I see.
And unfortunately, people out there manufacture keys in, metal shop and other things, so they pass those keys around. So then just go into parking lots looking for,
It's just really easy.
The chief is only on probation for just a few months.
I didn't drive away because all of a sudden I realized it wasn't my car. It was after graveyard, so. So let's look at auto theft per thousand, kind of regionally. Like I said, Renton was
Chief.
about,
Hold on, Ms. Perez has one more question.
Sorry, I don't know if there's such a thing as how long it takes to recover a car after it has been reported to be stolen. Is there such a data or not?
to locate.
I don't know. I mean, I reported that my car was stolen today, how long it's gonna take until the police
It all
recover
depends. I mean, if it's being used for transportation, if they steal it and here to just to drive to Seattle, it'll get dumped in a parking lot or a side street in Seattle, and just whenever someone complains about an abandoned car, they'll get the call. Or if you have a newer model car where you have OnStar or some of those systems are very effective because we have equipment in our patrol cars that if there's an alert, we can triangulate and figure out where this car is if it's been through the OnStar. And so it's really depends on where it's taken, the type of vehicle.
Thank you.
So these are the auto thefts per thousand population. As you can see, Renton is just over 10. Tukwila is about 20, I think 29.
Wow.
And earlier how I talked about, you look at UCR statistic, it doesn't take into consideration demographics and cities. And if you look at City of Tukwila, I don't know what their daytime population is, maybe 250,000 with all the retail and commercial, but their nighttime population is only 20,000. So all those crimes that occur with all those people during the day get divided by their nighttime population. That's why this number is so high.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you look at Kent, their auto theft's higher than ours. Auburn's a little bit lower. Federal Ways is higher. Seattle's is a little bit lower. Then you look on the east side. You look at the Redmond, Kirklands, Bellevues, and Issaquahs and Mercer Islands. I think your question about the passive systems and the alarm systems, if you look at the higher, realistically those are higher end cars, and because of all the protections involved, they're less likely to be stolen. So that's really why you look at the older Hondas, Toyotas, pickup trucks, those kind of things that you tend to more see in the south end. And then if you look at Puyallup and Tacoma, it's pretty similar to the type of activity you see in the south end. We talked a little bit about NIBRs. These are the 33 crimes that are now statistically mapped out to report. The original 8 from UCR are there, but we've also included some additional sexual assaults, human trafficking, destruction of property, embezzlement, some animal cruelty, drug violations, pornography, weapons violations. And so this is the new index. While at the same time we are tracking the old index for statistical purposes, these are kind of the new index. And if you go to WASPIG's website at wspc.org, you can actually go to the public area and pull up the NIBR's crime reports on their statewide report, which was recently published, that has every jurisdiction in the state. So here's how we compare with these 33 crimes. Seattle is at 96.9. Tacoma is about 143. Kent 116.9. Renton 97.8. Federal Way 108. Auburn 98, and Tukwila 269. So if you get rid of Seattle and Tacoma, if you just look at the valley cities, just barely we have the lowest NIBRs rate per thousand.
Mr. President?
Yeah, Ms. Perez.
I noticed in your chart before this one, 2 charts before this one, that Bellevue is really low. Well, not really low, but low compared to this other.
For auto theft.
No.
Right, they're low for
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, for auto theft, yeah. It's for the same reason that you explained, the different kind of cars that they have, or?
I mean, if you look at overall crime rate, I know the last slide I kind of go into a little bit. There's a lot of socioeconomic reasons why crime happens, and I can kind of explain that in the other slides.
Okay. Thank you.
So I went to the Washington's Office of Financial Manager, looked at the top 20 cities and looked at the crime rates. So I used OFM's population data, and I looked at the crime stats according to WASPIG. I have a little question mark on Spokane because they only reported 3 months worth of data, so that I wouldn't take in consideration that data as being accurate. But Tacoma is 143. Then if you look down towards Vancouver, Bellevue comes in at 47.5. Everett, which is just a little bit bigger than us, 116, sort of like Kent. Then you look east of the mountains with Yakima, up north of Bellingham. But then you kind of look at the east side cities. They're all kind of close between Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond. Tri-Cities. Sammamish, they didn't report their information through NIBRS. They didn't have that information. And then obviously you got Tukwila. And so that's just kind of comparison by population. So what drives crime rates? Like I explained earlier in some of the questions, it's really socioeconomic issues: poverty, unemployment, alcohol, illicit drug usage, family dynamics. Education has a role, peer influence has a role, access to firearms has a role. At the same time, as I've been tracking these stats over time, there is a correlation between crime rate and standardized school testing and the percentage of free and subsidized lunch programs. So really what that shows is income and poverty is really what drives crime statistics. The next slide is a map from the King County Community Health Needs Assessment, which was published in 2015-2016. If you look at the purple area, the darkest blue, purple, compared to the darkest red, the average, and this is based on housing and economic opportunity measures, and this is on census tracts. The dark blue area, average life expectancy is 87, where the dark red's life expectancy is 74. And so you can look at the disparity between east side versus south end. You look at adverse childhood experiences. In the dark blue, 9%. In the dark red, 20%. Smoking, 5% in the dark blue, 20% in the dark red. Diabetes, 5% in the dark blue, 13% in the dark red. Poor housing condition, 0% in the dark blue, 8% in the dark red. You look at low income, below 200% poverty, 6% in the dark blue, 54% in the dark red. And if you were to put the crime statistics, you can see where the low crime cities are on the east side, like we explained, and the higher crime cities. If you look at Seattle, there's a difference between North Seattle and South Seattle. Even though they report their crime statistics as one city, I'd be willing to bet that the rate in North Seattle is much different than the rate in South Seattle. If you look at your performing schools on their testing of their national, their testing scores, your high-performing schools will be in the purple and blue area, and your low-performing schools will be in the red and the dark red area. If you look at the number of the school districts, you look at the percentage of free or subsidized meal programs, same correlation. And so all those things feed into why crime happens. It's really a socioeconomic issue. And if you look at race patterns, for the most part, I think they look pretty similar to that, especially as you're seeing a shift towards the south end. So all these reasons are really kind of what drives crime statistics. It's socioeconomic concerns. Any questions on that map? I have to give credit for Bob Lee from Auburn, who kind of shared that information with me. So what are we currently doing? Current efforts and challenges. We're seeing an uptick in gang activity in South King County, an uptick in shootings. However, we're seeing a stronger increase along the Highway 99 corridor from Burien, SeaTac, Kent, Federal Way than we are seeing here. But we're a part of VNet, which is a Valley Narcotics Enforcement Team. It's a DEA, we're co-located with DEA for drug investigations at the airport. with originally their primary responsibility were dealing with transportation through the airport or through the mail or through trucking. However, we've kind of redirected their focus to look at drugs from a gang perspective and to focus their efforts on subjects who are known gang members who are actively dealing drugs. And so we're changing their focus. Our back patrol staffing downtown, while it's not what it should be, our original plan is to have 2 sergeants and 10 officers, but because of our current staffing issues, we have increased it. We're now to 1 sergeant and 5 officers in the downtown core, which is better than last year. And through this summer, you're going to see them in the downtown core on bikes and also in the parks and on the trails. Our special enforcement team emphasis, this is our plainclothes who do everything from narcotics to human trafficking. And we're really kind of not spending as much amount of time on marijuana enforcement, especially on marijuana grows, because there's a substantial amount of grows in the city, and trying to focus more efforts on violent crime and trying to figure out who the main offenders are, and also looking at property crime. Racing emphasis, we had a racing emphasis. This is last weekend. I don't have all the statistics, but we participated with other agencies, including the WSP, and we did make some arrests this last weekend. Sergeant Judge should be back to work tomorrow to start giving us more information on that. There's a regional auto theft task force. This was created by the legislature several years ago, where these auto theft task force are all around the state. Currently, we're a member of the auto theft task force. However, we don't have a member there. There's originally in our task force, there was about 25 jurisdictions signed on, and it consists of 1 supervisor and 5 detectives. So we've had detectives on there in the past, but currently we don't. And recently they've joined up with a task force based out of Pierce County, and we've also had a couple of WSP sergeants on board, and so this task force is responsible for looking at auto theft from a regional perspective, pretty much down the valley through Puyallup up through Lakewood. Regional violent crime emphasis. Chief Thomas from Kent gathered a bunch of us together a couple of months ago in Kent, all the chiefs from the South End, Seattle, FBI, DEA, ATF, King County Prosecutor's Office, and the Federal Prosecutor's Office, just to look at the rising crime violence and what we could do. The biggest issue is there's a local FBI task force that's working on violent crime. And at the same time, we're refocusing VNet to work on violent crime on all the various cities. The bigger issues is how do we coordinate our effort to make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes. And so we had a pretty good discussion of how to deconflict investigations. They've coordinated stings, for the most part, up and down the Highway 99 corridor, looking for known gang offenders who have warrants, seeing what we can do to reduce the level of violence in our community. And last but not least is law enforcement staffing concerns. This is the biggest issue, just not facing our department, but facing every department in South King County. You know, we're authorized 128 positions, and right now, today, I have 15 vacancies, 1 in the academy, 1 waiting to go to the academy. I have 2 out in field training, 1 on light duty, and 2 out on FMLA. So I'm effectively down about 20% of my staffing. We do have 3 officers. We have a lateral officer coming on board tomorrow. We have 2 officers coming on board in August, and we're actively doing several backgrounds for both entry-level officers and lateral officers. But this number, while it's large, is pretty consistent with all our neighbors in Tukwila and Kent and Auburn and Federal Way. We're all competing for the same recruits, and you know, it's typical to hold 2 days of oral boards or entry-level officers. Out of the 20 people scheduled, 4 won't show. Out of the 16 that we interview, we'll be lucky to pass 405. And out of that 405, we'll be lucky to hire one or two, because usually 1 or 2 will get hired by another agency. And so that's just the competition, how it is in this state right now. At the same time, we are increasing our outreach efforts through day-to-day contact from our officers out in the field, and also through community programs. You know, working with the public is really important to us. and building the relationships. It's just one notch below responding to 911 calls as far as how we work with the public. So with that, just a brief overview. Questions? Any other questions?
Thank you, Chief. Do we have any questions at this time? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, next is update on inclusion strategies and actions. That is Preeti.
Thank you. Can you hear me from this mic? Thank you very much, Council President, Council members. I'm Preeti Sridhar, and I'm here with a wonderful group of people to give you an update on our inclusion program. I have with me Ellen Bradley Mack, Benita Horn, and Brian Sandler. So we have the whole group here for you. The focus of the update today, the first and most important topic, which is where we'll be spending most of our time, is to give you an update on an HR inclusion tactical plan. If you remember, a few years ago, we had established as one of our priorities to make sure that as we are recruiting and hiring for the city, that our workforce represents the demographics of our community. And, you had provided us with that as an emphasis. So we're here today to share with you an update as well as an action plan on how, we're going to go ahead and achieve that. And then we'll also give you some quick updates on a few other programs that we've been working through the year, including the Mayor's Inclusion Task Force, efforts with our Renton African American Pastors Group, Latino Community Forum, and coming soon, 2017 Renton Multicultural Festival. So with that, I'll turn it over first to Ellen, and then she'll introduce Brian and Benita to take on. Thank you.
Thank you, Preeti. Good evening, Council President Pavone and fellow council members. My name is Ellen Bradley Mock. I'm the Human Resources and Risk Management Administrator, and it's my pleasure this evening to introduce to you the HR Inclusion Tactical Plan. It's the vision of, as you know, the vision of city leadership that we try to make employment as accessible to everyone so that it reflects the community in which we work and we live. HR is charged with providing this type of recruitment effort, and to that end, we have, I guess I better switch the slide. This is what it looks like, the front page. We have a couple of specific areas that we looked at in our research in order to create this plan. First of all, we reviewed all of our outreach and hiring processes through the equity lens. And it was several months ago that we brought the concept of the equity lens to you in our previous update, where we looked to see if it will, whatever it is that we're doing, will have an adverse impact. Did we ask all of the correct questions? And the first thing that we applied the equity lens to was our hiring policy. So that's been the first job, and we plan to use it throughout the rest of our policy work. We then conducted an analysis of city data and looked at all of the statistics, and you will learn more about those statistics when Brian and Benita do their presentation. We examined areas where implicit bias might flourish. We really had to examine every element of our recruitment process, from how things are worded on our job descriptions to the composition of our interview panels, just to name a few. We looked at and researched local and national trends and practices of note to see what other places are doing, to see what they are, how they are embracing diversity and trying to create better access to employment opportunities in their agencies and their places of work. To this end, then, the inquiry resulted in defining areas of opportunity. Obviously, we think that we're doing a pretty good job right now, but there's room to grow. We have some gaps. And so the recommendations in the report that you're about to hear reflect what we're currently doing and what we plan to do over the next 2 to 3 years. And I'm happy to report to you that we have rolled this plan out to my colleagues, the mayor's leadership team, and we have full support and agreement for the recommendations going forward. So at this time, I would like to introduce to you Benita Horn from the mayor's office and Brian Sandler, a senior HR analyst from the HR office, to present to you this plan.
Good evening. So we want to start, this is where we started. And most of you know we have when applicants apply for jobs, we have an online system, NeoGov. And in addition to being the online system that receives those applications and collects them for us for particular jobs, it also contains a wealth of data, not easily accessible, but fortunately my colleague Brian has some acumen with technology. And so before we get into that, this is the picture that shows where our starting point when we look to see where we were, because you remember many of you were involved in the high-level inclusion assessment that I conducted a little over 2 years ago. And from leadership from many of you, as well as from the administrators, one of the top 3 issues was, as Ellen mentioned, that the workforce was not reflective of the community. And so there are a number of factors, of course, that we found shaped those results. For one thing, the city of Renton is a great place to work. So we have employees who stay a long time, longevity. Another thing is that around 2008, 2009, we got hit by the Great Recession, as did everyone else. And so as many of you know, we actually reduced our workforce, which, and it took us several years to get back in a place where we were once again hiring. So as you can see, as you look across the chart by racial groups, that we don't yet reflect racially the community. However, the bottom line is that we have an opportunity for improvement, and that was our starting point.
This information here is the top row compares the number of applicants that have applied for jobs within the city during a specific quarter, 2016, second quarter. And you'll see that the population closely mirrors or reflects what Benita just showed in the previous slide as far as what the Renton population is. So there's some success with that, as we can maybe point to some of the outreach that we've done, including some attending more careers fairs, getting the word out. We put on the city career fair that we've had our 3rd annual this year. And so other partnerships, working with other departments and providing more outreach has shown that that is a possible outcome of increasing the number of applications and diversity of applications that have come in the door. What has not happened, though, is as candidates go through the process, the diversity decreases, whether it's reviewing the applications, inviting to an interview, and that decreases through the process. And so that's where the plan looks at what can we address to make those changes.
We found that there were at least 2 other jurisdictions that we came across in our research in this region who had conducted similar analyses, and their findings were parallel with ours. So basically, at every point of human contact, that's when the diversity of the applicant pool diminishes.
Mr. President?
Yes.
So I see, for example, when you say total number of applicants, specifically in the African American and Asian, you have a large number, African American 58, Asian 71, but the number of candidates qualified to interview, specifically in the African Americans, were 2, in Asian were 4. 4 out of 71. What do you define by qualified to interview?
That number is determined by, do they meet the minimum requirements posted in the classification, and also, they're being compared to other candidates in the pool from HR and also at the hiring manager level.
Sometimes when jobs are posted, there are supplemental questions that applicants are expected to answer. And the way our automated system works, if they, for example, do not complete the supplemented questions, then their application does not go further. So it's looking for both competencies compared to the position bulletined, as well as following the directions in terms of their application.
Okay.
There are sometimes, or some of those are screened by the departments too.
Right, so typically human resources will screen and then the department will screen. And some, yeah, like Benita suggested, that some of the positions require a cover letter or a resume, or there's certain supplemental questions that need to be answered.
Thank you.
The next chart shows that or graph shows that there's been some success over the last year. You can look at 2016, the diversity of those hired. This is vacancies filled. Last year we hired 87. This year we're on track we've hired already 59. And so you'll see that gender is more equal than in the past, and same with minority and non-minority. It's going in the right direction. We're not there, but we're heading that way. And I think that's a good demonstration possibly of what our outreach and other education for the hiring managers has done.
So what we want to do at this point is take you through the recommendations in the Human Resources Inclusion Tactical Plan. And we want to make sure that you understand the context and content of each of those recommendations. Some of them are departures from our practices up until now, and give you a chance to ask any questions that you have about any of those recommendations. So the first few recommendations we grouped under recruiting efforts. So when we talk about continue to analyze applicant flow, just as you saw that the chart, two charts back, that showed where, the starting point, who applies by race and gender, and then what, those who are invited to interview, those who are hired. We recommended that information periodically be provided to the administrators so that they have a picture of what's happening and what's going on. Until now, we had never been able to pull all that data together. And so it was a real eye-opener for us, and we figure that will be a good signpost going forward. We want to continue to nurture the strategic partnerships that Human Resources has formed with a wide swath of agencies. And some of those include Renton School District, some specific targeted programs such as we partnered with the police department for the Summer Academy. There have been a number of summer programs. The STEM program was covered by the whole city one year. Renton Technical School has been a strategic partnership. Brian and I met with the folks at Puget Sound Training Center. In the past, we've tapped into agencies like Renton Area Youth and Family Services. We've met with Puget Sound Testing, who does all the testing, for example, for entry-level police, to make sure that their goals, that they were confident with our goals and that our goals were in alignment, and they were doing all they could to support. Centro Rendu, which is an agency within St. Vincent de Paul, Somali Youth and Family Club, and so forth. So what we're really about is connecting directly with various agencies in the community who help job seekers and provide them with everything from training to skills to simply comfort in applying for jobs as sources for our applications. The communications division, the work with them will be key with Human Resources to really begin enhance the marketing of Renton as a desirable place to work. And that's a little, Renton's wonderful in so many ways, so it's another slant. We want to utilize, there is an online application feature that we can tap into that basically removes the names of the applicants from the application during the screening process. Now, once they reach the interview stage, of course, then the departments would get the name. But we found that very often just the names of applicants can somehow trigger implicit biases that the hiring managers may not even be aware of. And so we're going to begin that approach. We found that it's worked quite well in other places that have implemented it. It's very new here. It's brand new in Renton, but we have great confidence that that will also begin to make a difference. We want to explore designated internship opportunities with departments, and by that we mean many of our departments do have intern positions, and what Human Resources would like to do is to collaborate with the departments to collectively define a certain number of internships each year that could be pinpointed for non-traditional hires to really begin to increase applicant flow and connect with folks that have not had a history of working with the city or in public service. We also want to identify opportunities where divisions would benefit from a supported employee position, which is something like an internship starting out. It's a paid position, and the employees in this program often have differing levels of disabilities, and they receive on-site support from a job coach at no cost to the city. So we have seen a number of places where this has resulted in highly successful and long-term employees. The last one, develop and incorporate inclusion principles into job announcements and recruitment materials. We haven't done that yet. We have, as you know, our goal of inclusion with specific strategies under it. But we also want to find some verbiage that supports that we can incorporate into things like our job announcements. It might be a phrase or a sentence. One example, we looked at Renton Technical College, where they've now begun to revise every one of their position descriptions for instructors. And so in the opening paragraph now of each position, they have a line that reads, Renton Technical College is committed to increasing its cultural diversity with an emphasis on equity and inclusion among professional staff. We strongly encourage members of protected groups to apply for this position to meet the needs of our diverse students and service district. So again, just another affirmation. We'd like to see some verbiage that is customized for Renton included in our announcements. So any questions on recruiting strategies?
Okay. These next strategies relate to the hiring practices, and the first is related to the equity lens. Ellen already discussed the equity lens regarding our hiring policy, and we've also used it in reviewing the ban the box, which asks the conviction question on an application. So we removed that from our application as one step to have a more equitable process. The next area that we want to look at is the job classifications themselves, and looking at, what are some barriers that might be listed in the classification, such as the minimum requirements. Does this position really need 4 years? We might be missing out on some individuals who are coming. Sometimes it can be hard to enter the city coming in from college, and we require college plus 2 years experience. So is that required? And looking at all the different areas in the classification, including duties and everything, and looking at through an equity lens. We also would like to update and expand our resources for hiring managers. We have that available for hiring managers, but they need to be updated and more comprehensive, and maybe making an index for them to find on our SharePoint site. So that's something we're doing now, and are going to continue to work on that. And Also, resources for hiring managers include training. That would be with our interview process, helping them to learn what kind of questions help to select the best candidates, moving away from scenario type questions to more behavioral based questions. Let's see. We also would like to work with the departments to clearly define the competencies included in the job postings. That may include, do they value diversity, customer service integrity, highlighting those items, and so they're easily to be found for the applicants.
And tie into our city core competencies.
And then tie the interview questions to that as well. The next one is looking at maintaining a database of potential and external, internal panel members. With 59 hires so far this year, and some of them are hiring managers that have hired many people, it can be hard to find people to sit on the panel, and we want to encourage them to have a diverse panel, moving away from an all-white panel to male panel to diversity in different sections within the city, so that there can be a variety of opinions for the panel. So we want to create a database and help the hiring managers find panel members. We've done that, maybe at the airport they'll find someone who sits on the panel that works in the tower. So helping them to look outside their own section. And then the last item on there is, as we gather these individuals, require the orientation for internal and external panel members. We currently provide an orientation for panel members before each interview, but we would like to see it be a lot more comprehensive and also consistent. Any questions on this slide?
Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Prince.
no questions, just a comment. I am really happy to see the internal and external interview panel thing in here in the plan, because I think that's vitally important. Is trying to get diversity in our employment ranks, having people from outside the organization that are of a diverse background, or people who are inside the organization of a diverse background to sit on panels, I think will be very helpful in that goal. So, great.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Corman.
And I have sort of a related comment or question. I'm really pleased with where all this is going in terms of our proposed changes, but wondering if what you're describing now would address the question that Ms. Perez had about the number of candidates by ethnicity qualified to interview, and how low of a number that is compared to the total number of applicants. Would this somehow affect that, or maybe by putting the attributes, by publishing the attributes, or? I'm just surprised to see what a low percentage are actually qualified to interview, if I understand what that means.
I think a couple of things. We were able to tap into the Mayor's Inclusion Task Force as a resource to ask us, to ask them rather about the perceived barriers that members of their community encountered when they were trying to apply for jobs with the city, and under Ellen Bradley Mock's leadership. Actually, most of their suggestions have already been implemented, and one of those really had to do with even how the positions were described. Okay. They said, one person, I remember a paraphrasing, not an exact quote, but they said we had to go through 3 pages of boilerplate before we got to what the job actually was. And and the jobs that you now see posted online, you no longer see that. So that's part of it. Another part is removing the names of the applicants from the screening process. Right. So that all we're doing is looking at the job and the required competencies and the competencies that the applicants bring. And so any opportunity for implicit bias triggered by maybe a name or where a person lives or whatever it might be, no longer is part of the of the consideration. And then lastly, with the diversity in the interview panels. So it's a number of actions some already instituted and some that will be underway that we think will begin to shift that.
Yeah. And the reason I asked what I did is I was wondering, I mean, if this is a barrier, and I think you've addressed it, but I guess it's just, I'm understanding what you're saying. I mean, this appears to be a barrier to even get to the interview. So, I mean, we could have a diverse panel doing the interviews, but if we can't even get people to the interview process because of other barriers, we've obviously got to eliminate those.
We've challenged, Ellen and I have challenged the departments. I mean, we have wonderful staff, and they want to do the best job they can for the city. So when they get a job opening, they go through the job description, they want to have a plug and play. They want to have somebody with 10 years' experience doing exactly the same job so they can just hand them the keys and they are ready to go. And we're saying, no, that's really not what we're looking for people who have the ability to do this job well. And some of them may not have actually been 10 years in a city just like Renton doing the job just exactly like the one we want. And because that really limits the applicant pool. So Ellen is doing a great job and her staff of challenging the rest of the city staff to say, let's talk about what characteristics you really want for this job. What are the key things that we really are looking for? And we can train people to do the specific job in Renton. What we want is people with the right kind of productivity and innovation and competence and professionalism that can take that job to the next level. And so that's really, I think, a big part of how we can reduce the barriers to that initial screening.
So if I could paraphrase, so we'd get a broader array of backgrounds actually making it to the interview, and then try and get more diversity on the interview panel so they can recognize how those backgrounds could fit in.
I have a question along the same lines. What percentage of our jobs that we post have a degree required? Because that's always been typically the screening has, do you have your BS or your associates? And a lot of the jobs, once they get on the job, don't really require a degree. And now with the trends in education leaning more towards, hey, college isn't for everyone, real world experience and real skills are more important than the piece of paper. Are we addressing that issue in our screening process as well?
Yes, we are addressing it. Right now we're addressing it one open position at a time as we look at all of our job descriptions because we have many of them. But at the very least, we're looking at them at the time a vacancy becomes open. One of the things that I noticed right away, and Jay and I have had many conversations, as he said, about shortening our job descriptions, which are the same documents we use to post jobs, is to shorten them and make them really about what this position entails, not all of the complete details of every job duty that's required. And a part of that is looking very carefully at what are our requirements for the position. Something that drives me nuts about our job descriptions is it says 7 or 9 years of experience. For example, I'm like, okay, well, what is it, 7 or 9 years? Because that seems to give us, there's some gray area in there. And you're right, college isn't for everyone. I had a conversation over the weekend with about 10 millennials, and we were talking about that very topic. How are they supposed to get their foot in the door when really they want a career, maybe in public sector? I have someone interning with me this Friday who that's the very kind of question he's asking. He just graduated from Central Washington University. So it's a very comprehensive approach. At this moment, it's one vacancy at a time as we look at doing a more comprehensive brush at all of our job descriptions, because those do still feed into our job postings. We're also trying to do something that's way more creative with our job postings in conjunction with our communications division to really highlight what this job is like. And I got the idea for doing this by talking to people who are in the private sector, actually, who seem to have a really good handle on how to advertise jobs and make them sound exciting and inspiring and really want to motivate a candidate to even apply in the first place by not just describing how you make, for example, the widget, but what that widget's going to do for the rest of the world and how you're going to contribute to that bigger picture. Those are the kinds of ideas that we're trying to take off as a jumping board for just our advertisement, for example. But the things that Brian and Benita have shared is really a comprehensive approach that we're trying to make institutionalize here at the city of Renton. And we're not unlike some of our neighboring cities, but I can tell you where we're going to be unique. If we do remove the names of the candidates from those applications, we will be amongst the first to do that in this region. And I know that for some people that will be a scary move. I'm not gonna lie. I had to think about it for a while myself, but Anita's right. When you look at someone's name, that could be an area where implicit bias could flourish. And if we can remove that, I mean, we already removed the other identifiers for someone's ethnicity or gender. Why not remove the name? Is the name important? No, the qualifications are important.
And address
Mr.
this as well,
President.
because we discriminate, I'm sorry, I thought we were, yeah, we discriminate against people because we think the commute's too far for them, but they don't have a problem with driving 2
Right.
hours.
That's not up to us to make those kinds of decisions. It's up to, it's up to us to look at their qualifications, to meet them in person, and to determine if we believe that this person has the skills and qualifications that would be not only us an opportunity for them, but them to provide an opportunity for us. It's a two-way street. And in this day and age, the workforce of the people who actually want to get jobs is actually smaller than it's been for many years. There is a cross-section of the population who aren't even applying for jobs. I don't know exactly what they're doing out there, but they're not working. And so, you know, we have a limited group. It's not just in the police department. It's becoming a bit of a more systemic problem. And public sector jobs have a tendency to have a reputation of being a bit of a yawner. So we have to do more to really express what we're doing in public service.
Ms. Perez.
Yeah, you talk about gender and race. What about age? Is that a factor or not?
Well, it certainly can be if people are paying attention to what year someone graduated from high school in. Part of the training that we give when we do our interview panel training is we talk to panel members about those kinds of issues, because it can be a very innocent question to say, oh, I see you graduated. I graduated from North Kitsap High School. Oh, I see you graduated from North Kitsap High School. So did I. What year did you graduate? Okay, now we can make some assessments about what age they fall into. And so we encourage panel members to not ask those sorts of questions, because even though they may not have intended it to go in that direction, it could be viewed as that way and another opportunity for implicit bias to flourish.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, thank you. Other strategies that we're looking at currently are assessing those items that we're doing. Are those successful, and do we need to be reaching out to other agencies? Are those partnerships working well for us and for the applicants? So we're going to be reviewing those partnerships. We'll be reviewing the data over time and looking at ways we can improve our processes. And the other.
Can I
Sure.
just, I mean, this is the part where I really get excited, because so often when we look at creating change or transforming a culture in an organization, we put all of our energy into making the change. And the important part of making that change is tracking the effectiveness after those changes occur. So I'm really excited about the prospect of doing that, so that we know that the changes we make have the outcomes that we desire.
And then one other item with this too is that we currently don't have this in the plan, but it's something that we should look at is retention, because we can provide all kinds of outreach and make our changes in hiring, but are we retaining a diverse workforce? So that's something that other HR strategies look at. We did not look at that at this time, but we will look at that in the future.
One of the steps that we did take, the last bullet up there, is that for our executive positions, we often use search firms, so it's different than going through the NeoGov process. So protocols will be developed by Human Resources to ensure that any contractors hired to do searches for us have consistency, the same values that we have around making sure that they take steps to ensure a diverse applicant pool. So with that, we're going to, if there are no more questions, Mr. President, we're going to turn this back to Preeti Sridhar.
Thank you. There's no update on our inclusion program without talking about our key partners out there. So I'm going to do a really quick brush through of some of the efforts we have with some of our groups. Please feel free to ask me any questions, but also know that we'll be coming back with more details and more expansion later. So talking about our Mayor's Inclusion Task Force, one of the things that we've done this year is to have some changes in our membership. We had some members from the previous couple years who were either not able to participate, so some didn't even show up for a single meeting, even though they had all intentions. And then we had a couple members who've been very active, but they just had to step down because of other demands on their time. And simultaneously, there have been areas where we felt that we need more representation. So it's a process that we've had new members. In fact, as we speak, we're still looking for certain groups to have someone be represented. So I don't have a total number. I think it's 33 members that we have with the task force. I may be off by a few, but it's a really wonderful list of members. The other thing that's very interesting and fascinating about how this has been evolving and really being something that's a working group is the group has over time come together and established for themselves, which is really for the better of the city, some key goal areas. And these are areas where they formed into subcommittees and have actually been working on this. So last year, it was interesting that the task force, one of the key areas they came up with was to host a multicultural festival, and that happened. And the role of the members of the task force to make it happen was, incredible, was critical. And this year, as we've kind of gone forward, taken off from where we are, there's a whole lot of other areas that they're focusing on. So the 2017 festival is one of them. A group has come together to really emphasize on a campaign to show that Renton's a safe place. And they're looking at different ways that they can explore, have partnerships, and come up with a plan. In fact, one of the members has already brought a draft plan to the group. Another goal area, and this is another, again, one of the things that we've emphasized from the beginning, is the members of the task force are ways for the city to reach out to the community groups that are out there and all who make our city, and they are also the providers to the city, what the groups out there are looking for. So for that two-way connection between the residents in our city and city services. Another great area that the group came up with this year, and it will be great for us to be focusing and spending some attention on, is economic vitality. What can we do so that we can promote economic development, especially among the small businesses and ethnic and diverse businesses in our city. And then engaging youth, and then safety in Renton, and looking at safety again with a much broader emphasis, both with emergency preparedness as well as having forums for against hate crimes. So it's really been exciting to see how this has been evolving, coming together, and action items taking place. The next group is the Renton African American Pastors Group, and this group has been working closely primarily with the police department, but really, again, with other city departments. We've had forums where they've looked at, how can they help the city with the hiring goals, et cetera. So early this year, the group kind of came together and had a pause and said, let's look at all our accomplishments, what we've done so far, and where we want to go next. And they did find that there's been a lot that's been done, from events and efforts at the various churches and partnerships. But they did say we want to kind of go back to how we can continue to build that trust and relationship, especially with the police department. And then some of the things the police department have been doing have been incredible. One of their major areas of focus has been building community. And again, if Chief Milosevic was here, he could have given a whole presentation on the stuff they're doing. But for example, any projects with the Seahawks are exciting. So this year, one of the projects that they had was with Seahawks Bobby Wagner to again build a relationship with youth, with the police. And then we've had Black History Month at Living Hope Christian Church. You were all there for the Delbert Richardson exhibit that we had prior to a council meeting. The Reconcile group with Cry Out has had several different summits and coming together of the youth. We had a unity march, and there's plans for more of that. And in fact, just today, the group met to talk about a whole new community engagement process with a group called Everyday Democracy that we might be looking into later in the year. Oh, I had one more slide. And then as we go this has got Everyday Democracy, and then as we go forward, again, establish the goals and the projects that will take emphasis this year. The Latino Forum has also been a wonderfully engaged group. That community has grown. The projects and programs with the city continue to be really strong. They have been very, very, they've really appreciated the fact that the city had a proclamation being an inclusive city, and the other things we did was we translated that proclamation into Spanish, and we've made that available to the Latino community, and they've really appreciated that. There have been, again, a lot of interaction with the police from the participation of Chief Milosevic and Sergeant Awai at Spanish language radio stations, them attending different community meetings at the churches, and talking about things like immigration that have been at the forefront of this group. And recently, in fact, not this past Sunday, but the one before that, St. Anthony's Parish had an immigration forum, which they organized, and they had people from the community come, and they had lawyers there, and they invited the city and police department to participate. The big thing that's coming up, we're counting down, is the Multicultural Festival. The dates are September 22nd and 23rd, first day at Carco, and then at the event center. We've changed the timing a little bit for the second day at the event center, and it's from 3 to 7. And we've just been doing an amazing amount of work to get this going. We started earlier than we did last year, and then we had some of our experience from last year. So we've almost done finalizing the performers. I think we've got 2 slots now that need to be finalized. We've got a lot of marketing, already on its way. We've got posters and flyers and rack cards, and we've been distributing these. We have a full-fledged social media campaign, all planned right down to every post for every day leading up to the festival. One of the things we're going to do again this year is the storytelling, which people have really valued. So we're going to have the storytelling tent and encourage that as another part of the festival. Intercultural tables, games and activities, and once again we're going to have food trucks. So we think this is going to be an even bigger, better. We've got people now. Now we've got to, last year we were looking for people to participate, and now we've got to say, we'll get you in, So that's kind of an overview of everything, but questions for me or anyone else, or any other suggestions?
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. All right. Thank you, Ellen, Dave, Benita, Preeti. We are adjourned. Thank you.